a moment where something has happened and you've had to evaluate your priorities or maybe reevaluate them? When I was a sophomore in high school, our basement flooded. And while all floods are terrible, right, all floods are destructive in some way, this one was really bad because the water was like a foot high and it covered the entire basement completely. So we lost a ton of stuff. We had to redo the whole basement. It was crazy. It was madness. So because everything was covered in water and it was really, really high, we had to take everything out of the basement and take everything upstairs, and it took a very long time. So after school and after work, friends and neighbors came over to help us do all of this. It was like an all-hands-on-deck situation. Now, I got home from basketball practice that evening to a house full of people, right, helping my family and doing all these things, which was so thoughtful because I had plans. I had plans to go to a boys' basketball game or something for my high school. And now you would think that because of all this going on, I would reevaluate those plans and maybe not do them. But in my mind, as a 15-year-old, I was like, well, this is so nice. All these people are helping, so I don't have to help, and I can go. Yeah, you're all laughing. You know how this is going to go. So I get home, and I get ready to go, and I get home from practice, and I go upstairs, and in the chaos of what's going on, I get ready, and I tell my parents as I'm walking out the door, hey, I'm leaving. I'll see you later. It's not my finest moment to leave while the whole neighborhood was helping carrying up my stuff. And as soon as I got back, I think my parents were like, maybe she'll change her mind as she's driving. No, I did not. I went to the game, and I get home, and as soon as I walked in the door, I knew I was in a lot of trouble. Right, kids, we get this, right? As soon as you walk in there, you know the mom look, like, oh boy, I am in some trouble here. And I remember that night, my mom having a very long conversation with me about the importance of priorities and how I didn't get it right that night. Today, we are talking about priorities, specifically when it comes to our faith. We are in the last week of our series on the minor prophets in the Old Testament. If you have not been with us over the course of this winter, we have talked about all kinds. We have talked about Hosea, we've talked about Habakkuk, we've talked about Micah, Malachi, and Zechariah. And if you've missed any of those weeks, I'd encourage you, go back, listen, get caught up to those. But what we've seen throughout the entire series and throughout these different books of the Bible, that they have their unique context, they have their unique time period and their situation, but they all have a similar message. A call for the people of God to turn from their sin and turn back to God. Today, we are finishing our series by talking about the prophet Haggai. If you have your phones or your Bibles, you can find the book of Haggai with me. What we know is that in 586 BC, the armies of Babylon, they had destroyed the temple of Jerusalem. The temple was the symbol of God's house. It was God's presence. And so it was the focal point of Judah's relationship with God. And so in 583 BC, King Cyrus decreed that the Jews could return to their beloved city and start rebuilding the temple that had been destroyed. Haggai is one of the minor prophets, and we don't know a ton about him other than his ministry existed during the building of the second temple in Jerusalem. And that he ministered at the same time as the prophet Zechariah, who we talked about last week. They did their ministry at the same time. So the people, right, they moved back to Jerusalem, and they started to rebuild the temple like God told them to do. But then something happened. They started to shift from that quickly, right? They faced some opposition from other people. They faced some distraction by things going on. They started to become apathetic toward the rebuilding project and lost motivation in it. So the rebuilding of the temple was put to a standstill. It stopped. So much so that over 15 years went by and they still had not completed the temple project. Haggai knew what had to be done, and he spoke to what was going on, and he challenged the people to step up and respond to that challenge, and that challenge had to do with their priorities. We're going to start reading in Haggai chapter 1, starting in verse 1. On August 29th of the second year of King Darius' reign, the Lord gave a message through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, and to Jeshua the high priest. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies says. The people are saying, the time has not yet come to rebuild the house of the Lord. Then the Lord sent this message through the prophet Haggai. Then why are you living in luxurious houses while my house lies in ruins? We see Haggai speak to the reality, right, that the temple is nowhere near completed. It's nowhere near finished. And the first thing, right, that the Jews respond with to that is that, well, it wasn't time to rebuild it. They were busy doing other things. And the Lord tells Haggai to ask them the question, well, okay, if you're so busy doing other things, then why are you living in luxurious houses when my house lies in ruins? Meaning that this can't be a time issue. You had plenty of time to build your houses back, to build all the things for you back. You had all the time to do that. But you didn't have time to do what I asked you to do. And so Haggai is calling them out that they're more concerned with their own needs and their own wants and their own desires than they were doing what God asked them to do. It's an issue of priorities. And Haggai is telling them throughout these 2 chapters, frankly, to get it figured out. The definition of priority is the fact or condition of being regarded as more important than something else. It's when something is put to the top of the list over other things that are maybe not as important. It's when something needs to be done or dealt with or valued first before other things. Honestly, it brings me a little bit of comfort to know that the Israelites also had issues with priorities like we do. On the other hand, it concerns me a little bit because we still haven't figured it out after all of this time. Because we get this. We get this. This hits close to home for us. Right? Think about it. Pressures and demands and push into our life from all sides, expectations and tasks, and attack our schedules, right? Do this, finish this, be there, call them, everything and everyone seems to want everything from us all the time. And because of it, right, it feels like there's never enough time to do in a day to do what needs to be done. So because we're being pulled, right, in all these different directions, we run out of energy and we run out of time and we find ourselves rushing through life and what gets left in the dust? Usually the most important things. While it's very true, right, there are a lot of things that compete for our time and attention and energy and money and all the things. I'm not sure the actual problem is the volume of demands or the lack of scheduling skills or the lack of time management skills. I think the issue is more that we don't know how to prioritize what's important and what isn't. Let's pick up reading in verse 5. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies says. Look at what's happening to you. You have planted much but harvest little. You eat but are not satisfied. You drink but are still thirsty. You put on clothes but cannot keep warm. Your wages disappear as though you were putting them in pockets filled with holes. What's happening here is God is giving them all these examples, right, of how they're doing all of these things, but it's not really doing anything. It's not really making a difference. How there's like no return on investment in a way, right? They're planting crops, but there's no harvest. They're eating, but they're still hungry. They're drinking, but they're still thirsty. They are dressing, right, in warm clothes, but they're still cold. And so this is this powerful image for us because they hadn't finished the temple, right? Because they hadn't given God first place in their lives, because they hadn't made him a priority, their work wasn't fruitful and their material possessions did not satisfy them. Which brings us to the idea and the point of what we prioritize exposes what we find purpose in. What we prioritize exposes, whether we like it or not, what we find purpose in. Think about it, right? The Jews, they prioritize building all the luxurious things for themselves because they believed that those things were going to do something for them more than finishing the temple would. There was a reason why they completed those things first. Because their priorities reflected what they thought would satisfy them. What our priorities are and the things that we find purpose in are directly correlated. In our life, right, this is very real for us. We get this. We want more love, so we prioritize, right, relationships, healthy or unhealthy, over God. We want more affirmation, so we prioritize other people's opinions over us rather than God's opinion. We want more money, so we become greedy and less generous. We want more comfort, so we drown our pain, right, in things like addictions and alcohol and drugs. We feel depressed and anxious, so we prioritize time on our phone or on social media to ignore what's actually going on. We want to feel successful. We want to feel important, so we prioritize work over everything else. We could keep going all day. What we find purpose in is probably the thing we're prioritizing in our life. And it might not even be like a really bad or really unhealthy thing either. Like that, it doesn't mean that. It just might be the wrong order of priorities. It just might be the wrong order of where priorities should actually fall. And this is important because the sad truth is that when we spend so much time, right, prioritizing all these other things over our relationship with God, who should be first, they will never bring us the purpose that we're actually craving. Because faith in Jesus isn't, right, about all of these, how it needs to look a certain way. It's about being in relationship with the living God and prioritizing that. Let's pick up in verse 12. Then Zerubbabel and Jeshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of God's people began to obey the message from the Lord their God. When they heard the words of the prophet Haggai, whom the Lord their God had sent, the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave the people this message from the Lord. I am with you, says the Lord. So the Lord sparked the enthusiasm of Zerubbabel and the enthusiasm of Jeshua, the high priest, and the enthusiasm of the whole remnant of God's people. They began to work on the house of their God, the Lord of heaven's armies, on September 21st of the second year of King Darius's reign. Rarely did a prophet's message produce such a quick response. But in this case, we see that. The people began rebuilding the temple not long after Haggai's message. We see the Jews adjust, right, what their priorities are. They hear it, they see it, they go, okay, yeah, like we're going to adjust this. So the project continues, and they finally finish rebuilding the temple, right, with enthusiasm. And then in Haggai chapter 2, he kind of pulls it all together of why it's important. Haggai chapter 2, starting in verse 6. For this is what the Lord of heaven's armies says. In just a little while, I will again shake the heavens and the earth, the oceans and the dry land. I will shake all the nations, and the treasures of all the nations will be brought to the temple. I will fill this place with glory. The silver is mine and the gold is mine, says the Lord of heaven's armies. The future glory of the temple will be greater than its past glory. And in this place I will bring peace. The Lord of heaven's armies has spoken. While it is true that Haggai is referring to the actual temple building that symbolized God's presence, what's also really impactful here is that it's a reference to Jesus, the Messiah, right? God in the flesh, who is the earthly temple of God. Right, once Jesus is born and he starts his earthly ministry, we see him throughout the Gospels refer to himself as the true temple, as the one who has power over it, as God. In Matthew chapter 12, we see Jesus says that he is even greater than the temple. In John chapter 2, starting in verse 18, here's an example on the screen. He says, but the Jewish leaders demanded, what are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it. And Jesus says, all right, destroy the temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Right, so this focus of the message shifts from the local temple being rebuilt in Jerusalem to the worldwide reign of the Messiah on earth that is coming, setting up his kingdom that would never be destroyed. And so it's this powerful image that the Jews neglecting the building of the temple is this physical representation of the spiritual reality of how we neglect our worship and priority to Jesus. As we know all too well, we prioritize other things over God. Right, we get our work and our hobbies and our family and God kind of all out of order. It's easy for like vacations and televisions and phones to rank higher than God. We put other people's opinion over God's opinion. Right, as a Christian, we say like, God is number one in my life, but he's the first thing to move down when something's got to go. But what we learn from the book of Haggai is that not prioritizing your relationship with God, what he asks you to do, living and striving to live like him, to live holy lives, will lead to ruin. It will lead to disaster. Finding purpose in the things of this world will lead to emptiness. But when we prioritize our relationship with God, right, when we prioritize like going to church, when we prioritize reading our Bible, spending time in prayer, going to more group, being filled with worship music during the week, whatever it looks like for us, right? When we do that and prioritize those things, we will be filled more than we ever thought possible by anything else. So my question for us today is, what are you prioritizing in life? And I want you to be honest with yourself. What are you prioritizing in life? If we say that our faith is the most important to us, what is the evidence of that? Can we answer that question to ourselves? Like, what is the evidence of that? And if God is not first, there is grace. But then what can we do to reorder those priorities? Maybe it's one thing. Maybe it's one step. Maybe it's one thing you're like, I need to do this. I'm going to give you just a minute or two to think about those things. And then I'll come back up and close us out. So think about what are you prioritizing in life, and what do I need to reorder?